The book is called Fresh Water for Flowers, translated from the French. Although I think there's another title. I don't know if it was the British edition, but Change the Water for the Flowers. I saw another title, which I guess, you could, the French title is, Changer l'eau des fleurs. So I guess literally it would be change the water for the flowers.
Fresh
Well, it depends, but so this translation is fresh water for flowers. The book was a bestseller in France and apparently in Italy as well. This is her second, the author's name is Valérie Perrin. I had read her first book. Her first book was published several years earlier. And she just found out a little, because I was interested in seeing, I found an interview with her, but she was born in 1967, which makes her 56, 57 years old now in France. She grew up in the area called Burgundy or Bourgogne in French, and she settled in Paris. She's lived in Paris since 1986. Her first novel was published in 2015. It was called The Forgotten Sunday, and it won a couple of awards. The paperback edition had been a long-selling bestseller since its publication, but not so much in the English-speaking world. And then her English language debuts. I don't know if it was translated. This book, Fresh Water for Flowers, or Changer l'eau des. Can I say this again in French?
Changer l'eau des fleurs.
Changer l'eau des fleurs. Changer l'eau des fleurs. Was translated into English and won a number of prizes, especially among the independent bookstores and booksellers, and has been translated into over 30 languages. It was a bestseller, as I said, in French from 2019 onwards. I guess it was in the English translation appeared in 2020, but the book was Paris, the French edition 2018. So it was a COVID book, and a lot of people who wrote if you read the Goodreads website, or if you read the Europeans, because the Goodreads is usually English, English American readers. But in Europe, this was a bestseller, and it was a COVID, people had time to read it. So I'm not saying that's the only reason it became a best-selling title, but it enjoyed a lot of popularity during the COVID time. Apparently, it's also been that the author has sold the rights to her book to an Italian film company, and they're going to be making it into a film.
I can't wait for
that. I don't know.
I think it'll make a nice film.
Pardon?
I think it would make a.
I think it would make, yeah, you can see that it would make a
film.
very beautiful film with music and with scenery.
I mean, I've been in France, I've been to that area where the beaches are, and I was visualizing it all.
Yeah, so that's nice. So you can visualize it while you're reading it. Right. So this is,
And
very.
old cemeteries and.
Yeah. So you can see how that,
I can see, yeah,
and
and
she's-
some relationships.
and she said also that she picked the company, the Italian film company, who she wanted to, who she wants to make the film. And she also wants to be part of the writing of the script so that she can keep her hand in it.
I love it. Let her make money.
Well, I don't think she's lacking for it. Something interesting, I mean, if you know anything knows about French film, she mentions films a lot in the book too. And at one point in the book, she makes reference to a film by Claude Lelouch. And he's a well-known French filmmaker, who is, what was one of his films you may have seen, A Man and a Woman? One of these artsy French films from way back. So and then, it was so interesting.
Was that the one that had the song?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, unless you're thinking of the Parapluie de Cherbourg,
Yeah,
the umbrellas of Cherbourg, that was another one with Captain Janot. So that wasn't it. But and then I looked her up, and so interestingly, she just got married to Claude Lelouch. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. She's 30 years younger than Lelouch. She was born, because I looked him up. He's an Algerian Jewish Frenchman, I mean, of Algerian Jewish origin, very famous French filmmaker over the years. He's 87 years old, 30 years younger, and in the book, you're the only one who read it so far, but for those of you who read it, one of the characters marries a man 30 years older than her, and I thought, kind of, I wonder if that's
to read it. When I started reading, I went, it's very slow moving, but it grabs you. It's just, it's like a soft song that comes in because of all the references to music. And that's what I was left with. It was like the introduction to a play group or a sound group that somebody was making a play, you know, a sound thing.
Oh, that's interesting that you found the
That's
music
how-
part of it.
I looked up a lot of the, and I used to listen to French music a lot, because I love the romantic French songs, the old. And she would mention,
She mentioned, yeah, she
all
does.
and they were, yeah.
She mentions a lot of, so let me tell you, since most of you, since the rest of you, all three of you, and maybe listeners online, I don't know how many people read the book, what is it about? It's a long book. I mean, it's not difficult to read, it's very quick read, but it's not short in actual pages, it's over 400 pages.
And it was
But very short chapters. Each chapter begins with a little epitaph, or epigram, whatever wants to call it, like a little saying. You know, often books begin. Well, she has every chapter. Some of them are very short chapters of just a page or two. Others are longer chapters, begins with that. So the book is set. Let me just read you the opening page to the book. She writes. Well, so the little quote at the beginning of the chapter is, when we miss one person, everywhere becomes deserted. So what would you think? Is this on? No.
No,
Do I
but
need it?
no, I don't
You
think so.
I'm okay, all right. That when we miss one person, everywhere becomes deserted. So you think here that it's going to be a novel about loss, about grief, and it turns out that yes, it is, but it's not solely, and there is grief and there is loss, but there is also upbeatness to it, and there is life, and there is overcoming challenges in life. So it's got all kinds of stuff in there. But anyway, that's the opening little quote, and the first page reads like this. And she writes with humor, as you can see, a kind of ironic voice. My closest neighbors don't quake in their boots. They have no worries, don't fall in love, don't bite their nails, don't believe in chance, make no promises or noise, don't have social security, don't cry, don't search for their keys, their glasses, the remote control, their children, happiness. They don't read, don't pay taxes, don't go on diets, don't have preferences, don't change their minds, don't make their beds, don't smoke, don't write lists, don't count to 10 before speaking. They have no one to stand in for them. They're not ambitious, grudge bearers, dandies, petty, generous, scruffy, clean, awesome, funny, addicted, stingy, cheerful, crafty, violent, lovers, whiners, hypocrites, gentle, tough, feeble, nasty, liars, thieves, gamblers, strivers, idlers, believers, or perverts or optimists. They are dead. So the only difference between them is in the wood of their coffin, oak, pine, or mahogany. That's the opening page. So you see the voice. I mean, it's got a kind of irony to it. It's got a wit to it. Okay. So then that's the first page. First chapter, just one page. Second one, she introduces herself, which I'm doing because you haven't read the book, so I just want to introduce her to you. So the little quote at the beginning, because as I say, at the beginning of every one of her chapters, she has a quote, and they're very helpful because they're funny, they're whimsical, they give you an idea of what to expect in the coming pages. What do you expect will become of me if I no longer hear your step? Is it your life or mine that's going? I don't know. That's what she says. Then she introduces herself. My name is Violette Toussaint. I was a level crossing keeper. Now I'm a cemetery keeper. So a level crossing keeper was something that used to exist in France. I don't know, did it exist here? I don't, it apparently was a thing in France before so at level crossings, when the trains would go through, and trains in Europe are a lot more used and prevalent because the distances are smaller and people in Europe travel by train all the time. And there are these level crossings, which mean that, the barriers come down and then the barriers go up and but apparently before they were automated, there were level crossing keepers. And that was the job of somebody or people to depress the button, to raise and to lower the barriers. And it's a very, very important job. It's not a very glamorous one. It's not a very, what's the word? You have to be on all the time. I mean, maybe during the night, there weren't so many trains that as she describes, it was a pretty almost 24-hour-a-day job that she had to do. So that was, she said, I used to be a level crossing keeper, and now I am a cemetery keeper. So this is the woman who's going to be the narrator of the book, of our story, Violette Toussaint. And it's a pretty name, Violette. She says, I savor life. I sip at it like jasmine tea sweetened with honey. And when evening comes and the gates to my cemetery are closed and the key is hanging on my bathroom door, I'm in heaven. Not the heaven of my closest neighbors, no, the heaven of the living, a mouthful of port that she drinks, and she explains to us that who brings her the port, one of the grateful relatives whose wife is buried in the cemetery, and he comes to visit his wife all the time, except for 1 month when he goes on vacation back to Portugal, and he brings her this bottle of port every year to her, Violette. And she has gifts she becomes friends. We find out that her life as a cemetery keeper is not as sad. I mean, it's a mix, but she really loves her work and she likes where she is. How she came to be there is another story, she tells us. But when we meet her, that's what she's doing. She's no longer the level crossing keeper. She has a new place, and she lives there at the edge of the cemetery, the downstairs of this house, of this building. I know it seems like it's in a rural area. She's not in Paris. And there is the cemetery for the town and for the area. And there is a house, the cemetery keeper's house. She is a municipal employee. It's an undesirable position because she gets her house paid for, she gets amenities, she has a comfortable place to live. The downstairs is the office of the cemetery. People come to see her there. And the upstairs is her little private paradise that she has decorated with her beautiful curtains, and that's where she listens to her music and she retires there. And she says here, and she describes it. She says, my present life is a present from heaven. As I say to myself every morning when I open my eyes, I have been very unhappy, destroyed even, non-existent, drained. I was like my closest neighbors, but worse. My vital functions were functioning, but without me inside them, without the weight of my soul, which apparently, whether you're fat or thin, tall or short, young or old, weighs 21 grams. But since I've never had a taste for unhappiness, I decided it wouldn't last. Unhappiness has to stop someday. And the book will be about, we will find out over the course of the next 450-ish pages, what caused her unhappiness, why was she so unhappy and destroyed even. But when you go back and you say, aha, this is what she said at the very beginning, that I decided it wouldn't last, that it has to stop someday. So whatever grieving she was carrying with her, she decides, and that's by the end of the book, that she's not going to continue like that. She's not going to spend the rest of her life being unhappy. And then she says, I got off to a bad start. I was given up at birth in the Ardennes, in the north of the Département, which is the areas in France are called regions or states. They're called départements, so where that in the corner that, that's the way she words it, in the corner that consorts with Belgium. right? So it's just that northeastern border of France that shares with Belgium, the Ardennes. Where the climate is designated transitional continental, heavy rainfall in autumn, frequent frosts in winter, and where I imagine Jacques Brel's canal in his song Le Plat Pays. So even if you know Jacques Brel, as a kid, I used to love his music. I mean, he had this melancholy as a teenager. I used to used to listen to Jacques Brel's song, but there's all the time. So there you go. So as you say, the music starts there. So she says, when I was born, I didn't even cry. So I was put aside like a 2.67 kilo parcel with no stamp, no address C, while the administrative forms were filled in, declaring my departure prior to my arrival. Stillborn, a child without life and without a surname. Except then, I was alive. The midwife had to come up quickly with a first name for me. She chose Violette, which was probably the color that I was from head to toe. When I changed color, when my skin turned pink, and she had to fill in a birth certificate, she didn't change my name. They put me on a radiator, my skin warmed up. The belly of my mother, who didn't want me, must have chilled me. The warmth brought me back to life. That's probably why I love summer so much. Never missing a chance to bask in the first ray of sunshine like the sunflower. And then the next thing is when she tells us her maiden name after a great singer who had the same last name. That was probably, she said, the name of the midwife, because my mother wasn't around. There was no father on the scene. So he was this child who was put up for adoption, who went from foster family to foster family. And as she tells us, I kept very quiet as a child because I didn't want to disturb, I didn't want to make trouble for my foster families because I didn't want any, I didn't want to be given back. I wanted to still be kept. So she tells us her background, not a very auspicious start. And she says here, I never slouch. I developed the trait of standing up straight. It is a distinguishing feature of mine. I've never, ever slouched, not even on sad days. People often ask me if I did ballet. I tell them I didn't. It's daily life that disciplined me, made me do bar and point work every day. So that's her introduction to herself. And then she tells us in 1997, when our level crossing was automated, my husband and I lost our jobs. That's the next chapter. So the book, the style that she writes it in, which keeps you on your toes, is she goes back and forth between years. And there's a lot going on in this book. There are a lot of characters. You'll come to see a lot of characters, meet a lot of characters, and the years go back and forth. So when we meet her, she's a cemetery keeper. She introduces herself as that. She tells us that she was nobody wanted her. She was abandoned, when she was born, grew up in foster care. And then the next thing you know, that she tells us, in 1997, my husband and I lost our jobs when they automated these level crossings. So meanwhile, she must have gotten married, and who was her husband, and what's the story? And so she fills it in. So it turns out that she had gotten married to a man called Philippe Toussaint, and he turns out to not have been a very nice fellow, not a very good husband to her. She has a daughter with him, and they get a job as this level crossing keeper. Her husband, it turns out, is a lazy, good for nothing. His wife does all the work. Our narrator, Violette, is very, very hardworking, is so grateful that this beautiful young man fell in love with her. She marries him when she's 17 or 18 years old, as the child, who is in love with the child. The husband turns out he was very charming and beautiful, and he seduced her, but very, very lazy. And she works very hard. They have this little house. They are the level crossing keepers, and they live right next to the where the train crossing is. And she's the one who goes out at 4:52 in the morning to lift up the barrier, and she goes out at 6:53, and she goes out at 7, whatever, and in between takes care of this good-for-nothing husband, who spends most of his day either playing on his, whatever they played on in those days, Nintendos or Game Boys, I don't know what was back in the 90s, I don't remember the technology, but that's what he does, and he has a motorcycle, and he rides off on the motorcycle. But she seems happy, she's so thrilled that she has a husband, she has a house, she has a job, and she has a child. And then back and forth, but how does she end up a cemetery keeper? Well, that's because they lose their jobs when these level crossings get automated. So how did she come to that? She says she sees an advertisement in the and an employment agent. And she says, it reads, cemetery keepers wanted. And she says to her husband, look, it's a job with a future. You're never going to run out of, they're not going to automate it. And there are always going to be people who are going to be, you know, as long as we live, then we're not here forever, and cemeteries will always be around. So she says that she explains to her husband that she saw this ad, that a place called, and all these French names, you know, it's something on something on something. So this place where their cemetery is, where she's going to be living, is Grand Sion en Chalon. And they were looking for a couple to keep, keepers to look after the cemetery. And she thought, you know, this could be a good idea for us. A couple, we get a house, we get lodging, and there was, you know, there are no schedules like with trains. We won't have to get up in the middle of the night and lift barriers. And there'll be a lot less noise than when we had to live next to the train. So she said, this is really good. She tells her husband, I think we should take it. He wasn't so keen on it because he didn't really like to work in the first place. And anyway, but they do. And that's how they become cemetery keepers. And then when we meet her at the opening of the book, that's what they are doing. And so this book revolves around our narrative, who turns a very beautiful woman. And, you know, I looked at the picture of the authors, and so there's a little picture here, but she's a very beautiful woman. And I kind of think, oh, you know, she looks a little bit like the character, I imagine the character in the book. So Violette is described by others as a very beautiful woman. She has this cheerful personality. She has a very positive attitude. She has a big heart, and all these characteristics make her very appealing as the caretaker of this cemetery in this small town in the Bourgogne region in France. So what is the actual kind of, the book is a combination of, like, what would you call it? It's a romance. It's got a lot of characters, a lot of history,
because there's cultural stuff going on.
a lot of, there's a lot of atmosphere, a lot of description of France,
the culture of the small towns of France.
Yes, right, you get a lot of that, you get a lot of
live in those
description.
towns and how the neighbors really help each other,
Yeah,
how people get involved. It's sort of like the village mentality of a small European town, but the sophistication of the music seems to.
because the French and the culture, and and it's
But the
also
music,
a little
she's
bit of.
aware of the music, so it's not like she's isolated. And she's learned to be resilient and positive. So it's a very upbeat book. Like at the end, when I should be sad, I really wasn't so sad.
Even though, right, so yes, I mean, yeah, the ending was a very uplifting ending, but it's also, let me tell you, it's also a bit of it's a detective story too. There's a detective story part to it, because one day, like, to get the story going, there has to be, you know, there has to be something to when a novel is written, then the author has
It's unexpected.
idea.
The adventure is unexpected.
Yeah, so you know, when you look at it, it's so, she is the main character, but one day, what happens, what gets sort of the action going, and around it is all the description. A police officer shows up from Marseille with an unusual request, and he goes to see her because she's the cemetery keeper. So he knocks on her door, rings her bell, whatever. One day there he's standing there, and he says to her, his mother, who had recently passed away, had mentioned that she wanted to be buried. So he comes from Marseille, which is in the south of France, and here she is up in the north of France. He shows up with this request that his late mother had said that she wanted to be buried in that cemetery that Violette is taking care of, in that town, which is far away from Marseille. And she wants to be buried there. She wants her ashes to be scattered on the grave of an unknown local man. He doesn't understand his mother's request, but that's the request that she's left him. So he appears at Violette's door saying, like, this is what my mother wanted. I don't know why she wants her ashes to be scattered and not near my father. And from that moment on, things take an unexpected turn. And that's where the plot goes. Why? What's the connection? The bonds between the living and the dead are discovered, and all these it takes the 400 and whatever pages to describe what. She said that, and her, as I said, her life has never been easy. She goes from being an unwanted baby, sent from an orphanage and several foster placements, and having this husband who was not very helpful. And there is the tragedy in this story. I mean, I don't know how to do this without spoiler alerts because it's, I guess, I don't know. I'm hoping that maybe you'll read the book, but, okay, so, well, I mean, it's the sad part of the story is where the book becomes that the little girl under tragic circumstances, Violette's little girl at the age of 7 dies. And she has been her one, the main sunshine of her life, her reason for living. And we find it out quite early on in the story. And then we also find out that Violette has this idea of, she doesn't want to let go of the idea of why her daughter died. She suspects that something went wrong, that somebody is responsible for the death of her daughter and 3 other children in a fire. They went away to a summer camp.
But it becomes a murder mystery.
So it becomes a murder mystery in that sense.
It's a murder mystery twice. So she hopes to, like when her husband dies. So
Right.
discovers him.
So,
And then this one, and the twist on that was very unexpected.
yeah, so that was where her
And
enemy
that's like
was very,
Perry Mason.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's at the beginning. So then you realize, okay, so this is a woman who's dealing with the death of a child. And the death of a child, I think, you can't, like, one's parents, one expects to outlive them. Anyone grieves for any loss of any family member, any dear friend, but the loss of a child is, I think, the worst loss that anyone in parent can ever live through. And that's what this Violette, and we meet her at the beginning, that's what she's living through. So sorry, just make sure. Oh, it's off. Yeah. And the mystery is, right, she said there are 2 mysteries. So first, why this detective company wants to know why his mother wants her ashes to be scattered on the tomb of an unknown man, not his father. That's one thing that we want to find out. But the other one is this, that Violette has this idea that there may be somebody who is guilty of the death of her daughter, that it wasn't an accident, because it's an accident. There was a fire and children unfortunately died, but Violette thinks that there might not. So that's where the mystery part of the book, and it's done very nicely because there's so much more to it. It's not really, only a whodunit, but as you said, there's so much music, there's so much scenery, there's so much film, and there are characters, and it's very French. when you read it in English, you can almost imagine in your head that you're reading it in French, even if you're not reading it in French, because it's so French. There's so much talk about food, the meals that they eat and the descriptions of their meals. And then, you make a sauce with fresh basil and tomatoes. The Italians, you could see why the Italians like this too. Love, women, romance, and food and wine and music, right? Italians, French, they all have a great combination. The North Americans are like a little behind in this, but it's as one reviewer said, this book is a wonderful literary feast, a story about life, death, and a bit of a mystery as well, full of imperfect characters from the grave diggers, and who forms Violette when she comes here to become the cemetery keeper. Her husband lasts a little while, and then he disappears. One day, he rides off on his motorcycle into the sunset, or maybe not into the sunset, but he rides off, and he never reappears, and she doesn't know what happens to him. She thinks, what happened? Eventually, she finds him a little bit later. Not that he was any great loss to her life by that point, because he hadn't been helpful at all. And but her friends, she has a community when she moves in. Maybe a little bit ironic. She's a cemetery keeper. The people she's taking care of, well, not only, are the cemetery, but it's their family members who come. She deals with the families, with the bereaved. She deals with, so she has to be dealing with people all the time, but her close friends become the grave diggers, the priest who is called to, it's a Catholic cemetery, it's France, who's called and becomes a close friend of hers. And the grounds people, the people who take care of the grounds, and it's very beautifully taken care of, there are flowers, thus the title, fresh water for flowers, because there's a big deal always to be put flowers on the graves, and you have to put fresh water on the flowers. There are the trees, there are the grounds, so this is, and it's in the countryside, so the cemetery is, you imagine it as a very beautiful place physically. And she has good friends now. The grave, as I said, the grave diggers, the groundskeepers, the priests, they become her little group of 6 close friends. And it's a story that, you laugh because her voice is very witty, and you're sad and you can cry at parts of it because she really is. She has her own personal grief, which is the overwhelming part of the story, but the other characters have their stories as well. Sorry?
I got the impression also that the cemeteries from this book, I didn't know before, that it was not just Catholics that were buried there.
Did you get, so there was one, there was one, you're right, so that was it. There was
So it's not like this is the area that people are buried. I thought
Yeah,
because
that was
it's
interesting.
small.
Yeah,
I said, okay, that's small town living. You're not gonna have the separate Jewish cemetery.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they're not.
there is one Jewish funeral mentioned. Yes,
That's
thank you for
right.
bringing that up. That's what I actually thought.
So
That's
it's
interesting.
a community ceremony.
Or that they're, usually like if you go to Europe, I've been in a couple of places small, that the cemetery, they're not buried in the same cemetery, but they're, I don't know in this case in the book how she chose to wrote it, but in real life,
Maybe
they're
they're not buried next to the
next
Catholic.
next door.
area.
Yeah.
Same area.
They do have non-denominational cemetery.
It
I
might
have one in the West Island. I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know, but it was interesting because the priest is one of the main characters, and because most of the people buried there
That's
are,
right.
except then there's this one funeral, because she writes about a lady rabbi comes from I don't know where, and they have this little ceremony there. So I thought that was, but generally it's and she has made herself, after the tragedy of losing her daughter, although she's still, that's still very much part of her, and the whole idea of grief and how you can never get over it, but you eventually, with the passing of time, the pain lessens, and that's what she finds, but she still wants to know, and that's where the mystery of the book is so cleverly worked into the story. You know what really happens to her daughter, and she does, and then her husband reappears at some point, and we get to see, and I thought what was so interesting was because it's told from Violette's point of view, the vast majority of the book, but there are other voices as well.
Kathy, you know what I find interesting, that you told me about her and her husband, the author, and this book is written by the screen. Now that I think about it, it's like, how could it not be?
True, it could be, yes, you see that it works out.
You don't mind if I sit down?
Not at all.
Thank you very much.
Very cinematographic, it really lends
Now it
itself.
makes more sense.
So
makes more
it'll be interesting.
She's already got the music score.
And she's certainly got the, she's got the location. So this voice of the narrator, this wry, incisive, self-aware, equally parts droll and melancholy of our narrator, she is the reason that the novel is neither depressing nor sentimental, although it is often heartbreaking and it is very romantic in parts. Like I say, very French. There's a lot of blood. There are a lot of mistresses. There are a lot of adulterous marriages, and I don't know, I think it's particularly French, that somehow no big deal if the men have mistresses and if the women have lovers, and and yet they've got husbands and wives, and it's like almost every character has that. And I thought, aha, this is very French. So, and
in France.
pardon?
Did not come.
No, of course not. No, but the French somehow, I don't know, it seems like they
Famous for it, yeah.
made it famous. And so our Violette, our narrative voice, she's still careful when she speaks. She is private. She doesn't indulge in overt displays of emotion. She speaks like she dresses, and this is interesting. She tells us this about herself. I am winter on the outside, meaning classic, somber clothes for the eyes of others, and I am summer underneath. Light, colorful clothes only meant for me. Nothing to do with the seasons, but rather the circumstances. And when we first meet her, she says to us, when she's at work, when it's daytime, and she has to deal with people, she wears her somber colored clothes. She looks whatever professional in that profession is, but she just wears, her muted colors. And then, or she wears a coat, it's a dark neutral colored coat. But then when she hangs the key on that bathroom door, when her work day is done, and she goes upstairs to her apartment, which is light filled and music filled, and she has her wine, her glass of wine, and she has these beautiful light colored summery clothes. Even if it's winter outside, it doesn't matter. That's her personal, her private versus her public self. So this is how she has managed to deal with what happens to her. And it is not that Violette is not warm or compassionate. And when she reflects on the demands of what we, the readers, might think is a strange job, being a cemetery keeper, which include, think of it, assisting and often comforting those who come to bury or visit their loved ones in the cemetery that she is in charge of. She's the overseer. She says, quote, "For a woman like me, not feeling compassion would be like being an astronaut, a surgeon, a geneticist, not part of my planet or my skill set." Because she tells us, I have been destroyed. She's told us that at the beginning. And though, as a result, she has retreated into herself, leaving, she leads us to believe at the beginning of the story, leaving love and happiness to others. She has found somehow her sense of contentment, although she's still grappling with this idea that somebody caused the death of her daughter. But basically, she has tried her best to come to an equilibrium, and she has said that at one point in the story, though, she says, she resolves that my unhappiness has to stop someday. And she didn't say when, and is it going to happen in the book? That's another one of the things we want to find out when we read. Even unhappiness stemming from a grief as intense as hers for her daughter, and it would be nothing, more intense than the grief of a lost child. So as I said, we don't find out until about, I don't know, maybe the third of the way through the novel, about what happened about her daughter's death. But in the meantime, we do get to know about Violette's story, about her marriage to that seems to be good for nothing guy, and her first job as a level crossing keeper. And the novel, as I mentioned, goes back and forth between past and present gradually. So the narrative arc of the book, if you want to call it that, is this back and forth, which seems to be a stylistic thing that many novelists use. I know I say this over to like this back and forth kind of way of writing. It's moving towards finding out how, and giving us readers an explanation of how she came to be where she is, and also why she's there alone without her husband. And one of the reasons, perhaps the crucial reason, is that she moved to be closer to her daughter, to Leonie, who is buried in that cemetery. So there we find that out a little bit later on. That's why this cemetery job, that's why she stays there. And and this is an engine that kind of powers a lot of the developments and the revelations of the novel. So I'm not going to tell you all the details. I mean, too many details, 400 whatever pages, and hopefully you'll read it yourself to appreciate the writing. But she says, even though she's surrounded, I mean, that's her job, right? By definition, she's surrounded by other people's death and other people's mourning and grieving and commemorating and coming to visit their loved ones. She is, as she says at one point, I have become a connoisseur of funerals. And she says, I think you can understand, and you can even judge someone's life by the send-off they get. You know, she's kind of droll in her writing again, you know, she'll comment that, so, and she has to, and she keeps a notebook, she keeps notebooks. Because she says, you know, one day someone might come back and want information about their loved one's funeral. So she takes notes. She becomes the keeper of records, you could say, and not just official record, like so-and-so is buried in this plot. So if somebody comes, I'd like to visit my late grandmother. Yes, your late grandmother is in row 25, you know, grave B. But she also makes notes of how many people came to the funeral, what was said, what songs were sung, partially for herself, maybe, but also for those who come back. So she's a great source of information. And she says that. She says, so that's it. She records all of this in her notebook. The weather, the coffin, as she says, you know, the only difference between my neighbors at this point is the kind of coffin. Was it oak or was it walnut or was it, you know, was it like, did they pay thousands of francs for the coffin or did they not? She says, the flowers, the family and friends who came, the speeches, did they play music? And she knows all, she has all of this information. It's like she's a repository of information. She's also would be a great source to detectives or somebody looking to solve mysteries of things. She knows her quiet neighbor's birth and death dates, and often much of the story that came in between. And she tends affectionately, she really does it. She takes affectionate care of their graves. She waters, she weeds, she cleans, she becomes quite the horticulturalist, but she did not have to do so much when she was the level crossing keeper. I mean, they grew a little garden, but nothing like this. Her work and thus the novel can inspire us or make us think about the many ways that we all live and how we go. Death, as Villette observes, never takes a break. It knows neither summer holidays, nor public holidays, nor dentist appointments. It's there everywhere all the time. No one really thinks about it or they go mad. It's like a dog that's forever weaving around our legs, but whose presence we only notice the day it bites us, or worse, bites a loved one. And she herself, as I said, has been terribly bitten, and if you want to continue her metaphor, by the death of her daughter. This is what destroyed her. Ever since my childhood, she tells us, I never made any noise so that I wouldn't be abandoned. And you know, you read about this in other stories in other novels, where children, the characters are children who've been, or maybe even memoirs, who've been put up for adoption or who've been abandoned in foster homes, that they want to behave themselves the best that they can because they don't want to be given back. She says, but I left your childhood screaming, meaning that when I lost you, she's talking to her daughter as she's reflecting, I was screaming. And it takes her years to emerge from the absolutely paralyzing grief that followed the death of her child. And that's one of the hardest parts of the book to read, is this description of the grief of this mother who has to carry on after losing her child. And she, I think, writes about it very beautifully. She says, and listen to the analogy, yes, the war was drawing to a close. We think, war? But I sensed it. I would never recover from the death of my daughter, but the bombing had stopped. I would live through the post-war period, the longest, the hardest, the most pernicious. You pick yourself up and then you find yourself face to face with a girl of her age. When the enemy is gone and there's nothing left but those who are left, desolation, empty cupboards, photos that freeze her in childhood, all the others growing, even the trees, even the flowers without her. And she writes this and she's, you know, you can just, and this is what a parent, God forbid, who loses a child, it's like you lose your child, the child was lost at a certain age, and so they'll always be 7 years old. They will never be 8 or 9 or 10. And then she continues to write. And I looked at, to find some information about her. I thought the way she writes it, did she lose a child that she writes so
Maybe she did.
it didn't say anything, so she has 2 grown children, but
She knows it.
but
too
she
well.
knows how to write about, so and then later in the novel, she runs through this litany of all the things that won't happen to her daughter. You won't put your teenage years behind
She
you.
must have lost.
You won't celebrate 25 and still unmarried by St. Catherine's Day. Must be some French thing, I don't know. You won't dance any slow dances. I won't see your wrinkles and liver spots appearing, nor your cellulite and stretch marks. And then it's a long list, and it's heartbreaking because she's grieving the future that would never be for someone who loses a child. And she says, but she avoids the easy, inadequate cliches about consolation or the kind of messages that can hurt rather than help. You know, people have these platitudes about, oh, you'll get over it or something. She never does that. So that's why I thought she really knows how to write about this. And then when she finds this beautiful way to express the ways that her daughter, who is physically absent from her forever, will still stay present in her life. And she writes, Violette thinks to her, and Perrin writes in the book, you will grow up differently in the love that I will always have for you. You will grow up elsewhere, among the murmurs of the world, in the Mediterranean, in the flight of a bird at daybreak, at nightfall. Through a young girl I will meet at chance, and she goes on and she gives this whole list. You will be reborn one day in the form of a flower or a little boy to another mother. You will be everywhere. Wherever my heart resides, yours will continue to beat. And it's like, yes, these passages are so beautiful. And she intersperses the beauty of this and it's not sentimental, it's so beautiful. And then you've got the love stories and the adulterous relationships, and you find out that this detective who appears at the beginning at her cemetery, young, good looking anyways, you know, you figure, okay, so there's gonna be some kind of romance between our Violette, who was sworn never to have anything to do again with romance, and him, and is he gonna figure out why his mother wanted her ashes spread over the grave of this man? And it turns out yes, and you know, we find there's another love story, and we find out the love story of this detective's mother, Yvonne, and the love affair that she has had with this guy who's Ray, you know, she wants her ashes sprinkled over. So that we do find out eventually, by the very end, what happened to that fire that night. And it's not the way Violette had imagined it. It's a much, you know, less, nobody is to blame ending to that, which was a bit of a surprise, because the way she leads us up, you think, oh, somebody really must have been guilty. And
Somebody was.
Pardon?
Somebody was. That was
Yes,
the
but it
surprise.
wasn't, pardon?
That was the biggest surprise.
But it wasn't maliciously. Anyway, okay, well, you can talk about that after, but yeah,
Malicious has
yeah,
anything to do
no,
with-
right. And so, so woven through Violette's narrative, is the diary of our detective's mother and her love story, which is also not an unequivocally happy one. And as I said, there's this mystery plot. There's a lot going on in the book. I don't know if, you know, if you're interested, you haven't read it, so I don't know, like some readers found that there was, excuse me, too much going on, and, you know, it was hard to keep things from getting confused. I don't think so. But there's a lot. It's a very rich story. As I said, the writing is it's very easy to read. You feel it's very atmospheric. You feel like, you know, it's very French with the descriptions of all those things, and the music and the journey, because the journey of Violette, she's the main one with her journey, and then there are the journeys of the other characters as well. Perhaps Violette's journey alone would have been enough. I don't know, you haven't read the book, so I don't know whether you,
Yeah,
because there's a lot.
she covers more than I thought was gonna happen when I started the book. And what I also think was important, that showed the maturity of the author, or her mature attitude, is she wore somber clothes on the front. But underneath, sometimes we all jump to conclusions when we see people. And she reminded us but what you see is not.
Is not always what you, right, but there's a lot going on under the surface of,
People are.
yeah, much more complex and much more layered, literally, yeah,
Think
Yeah.
twice before we jump to conclusions.
yeah.
That's what I got. reminded of.
That's an interesting, yeah.
I got reminded of that. Don't
Yeah.
jump to conclusions.
Yeah, yeah. So, to sum this up, let's say, so every chapter, as I said, begins, which were these little epigraphs, or epitaphs, which also you can say, this fits because on people's tombstones, sometimes, cemeteries, you'll see something written, a little, I don't know, maybe from a poem or a song that the deceased liked, or from a, a quote of something, and so it's very apropos that on each chapter, and there are about, let me see, a lot of chapters, 93 chapters to the book. So you have 93 of these epitaphs on
Each one.
in the book, each one. For example, just to read you something there, so nothing can wilt it, nothing wither it. This charming flower is called memory. That's one. The last one. We are at the end of summer, the warmth of those evening return journeys. Back in our apartments, life continuing as usual. That's the last chapter of, oh, sorry, no. 94 is the last chapter. And in that chapter, she sums up, there's a funeral that takes place. And she describes the funeral and she says, well, I'm not gonna read you that because it sums up too many things that maybe perhaps you're gonna read the book and read it yourself. But this is the way she writes it. It's a very clever, very lovely way that she sets up the book. And when you first look at these little quotes at the beginning, you think, oh, why did she do this? But then you realize they make sense, even though many of them are not the kind of thing that you would actually carve onto someone's tombstone. So this is a novel that deals with cemeteries, so it's by definition with death, but it also writes so much about life in the spirit of inviting us readers to think about life, to think about love, to think about people, and as you said, the different layers and the complexity of people, to think of Violette, our narrator, our main character, the heroine of the novel, her specific path back from darkness into light. And some of the readers, because I read different reviews, thought, well, a couple of them said, well, maybe it's a little bit too pat, a little bit too romantic, but maybe not. This is what novels can do. And it's uplifting that Violette comes to she has a sense of hopefulness. We, the readers, have a feeling of, okay, maybe she has found love again not that she's so old, but in her middle age with this man who appears at the beginning of the book, maybe. And there is going to be some more light and more joy in her life, even though she's come to be, she's accepted. Pardon? It's a surprise ending.
Well, you know what, we have to hear what the surprise ending.
No, we're not, yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I did not read the book and it will not be on the subject of this book. I just have a short question. Who is suggesting the particular book? Is it you or it comes from your audience?
I'm happy to take any suggestions, but I'm the one who chooses the books, yes.
Right. Okay, so the subject of the book is always fiction, or sometimes it can be more close to the reality?
Usually they're fiction, usually it's novels, sometimes we do memoirs, and occasionally we do nonfiction if it's not a particular, very technical subject. Like if it's a nonfiction book about, I don't know, what have we done over the years? You know what was one of the favorite ones? Does anybody remember, what was that called? The Something of Henrietta Lacks. What was that book? Do you remember it? It was about this woman a black woman who lived in the 20s, and her cells were used, remember that? It was such a good book. And still today, because this thing, reading the cells, something of, anyway, occasionally we do
It was
nonfiction.
making.
The immortal life
The
of
Immortal
Henry,
Life
yeah.
of Henrietta Lacks. No, I'm sure you know.
Story.
No, anyway, it was but generally it's fiction. Anyway, just to finish, thank you everybody for coming and listening, and I hope if you would like a nice read, like a real good read, Fresh Water for Flowers by Valérie Perrin. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of film the Italians are going to make of this book. Thank you very much.
This book is like.